are still trying to plead with them to be sensible, to be humane, and to release those hostages that are in there.
After the deadline, we will kill everybody here, all the hostages.
For the first time ever, there's the chance to go behind the cloak of secrecy, that is the SAS. SAS, the complete soldier's story, which includes unseen footage and interviews. Experience the grueling training. The incredible action. The amazing speed. And the unbelievable strength of the greatest fighting force in history. Also available from the explosive and compelling TV series are a further 4 videos.
They always say, luck shines on the brave.
These are the men who risk everything.
When you join a force like the SAS, you know that you'll be used for the best jobs.
Get the SAS's side of the story. Get the videos and get viewing.
In January 91, the Iraqis began launching Scud missiles on Israel. If Israel had retaliated, it would have been politically impossible for the coalition Arab forces to remain in the war. The Western alliance against Iraq would have disintegrated. The SAS were tasked to go deep behind enemy lines, locate the Scuds, and take them out. Failure might have given victory to Saddam Hussein. They would cross the border in strength, fully armed, fully tooled up, maximum ammunition. They would then search until they located a mobile Scud position. They would drive in, guns blazing, destroy it, drive off into the night. This film is about 2 successful missions deep behind enemy lines. Young Trooper Matt's story. The first mission is about the first shot fired in anger on the ground in the Gulf War. The first kill. White-eyed, up close.
Initially, they talked about us doing some form of hostage release because of all the hostages that had been taken in Kuwait and then moved up towards Baghdad. And then taskings changed throughout as the theatre actually built up. They started looking at us going into Western Iraq, deep behind enemy lines, and doing some form of search and destroy. Basically, as a disruption force to draw the attention away from Kuwait. There was very limited information on the enemy that we was going to bump into, even though they said that it could be substantial. We just went out there, basically, and just see who we'd come across. We knew that we were better than anybody that we were going to come across. So I think that's where our professionalism then clicked in. It was a mixture of terrains. I can't ever remember coming across any sort of desert environment like sand, like you saw on the people saw on the TVs. It was very, very rugged terrain. We'd been driving all night at that stage. We'd been across the border in the region of about 4 to 5 days. been in as layout point as LUP for most of the day. And what we tried to do is get into dead ground, into a depression in the ground if we could, to keep concealed, especially at a great distance. We put sentries out upon the high ground, which could then identify anything coming towards us, and cammed the vehicles up, put big cam nets over the vehicles, and basically just got on with administration, cleaning weapons, sorting yourselves out, getting some food down you, and then eventually getting some sleep. The weather was, in everybody's opinion, horrific. You know, the guys that have been to Norway said that they'd never ever been so cold. We didn't have the equipment and the clothing to keep us warm. I started to have a lot of cold injuries to my fingers because the gloves that we had weren't good enough. They were only very thin leather gloves, and your hands became very, very hard and very cold. As the time progressed, the skins around my fingernails started to crack on all my fingers and both thumbs, which caused a lot of pain, especially as it got colder in the night. So what we were having to do was wrap socks round, cut holes in socks and put socks over his hands. Because it was that cold, you were gritting your teeth a lot more. And I cracked quite a few of my teeth at the back of my mouth because of just pure gritting my teeth. Clothing was initially very limited. We was under the impression, and our intelligence had stated that it was quite warm out there, and most of us went out with jungle combats or desert combats at the time, which turned out to be quite poor. And as normal SAS smocks, which are slightly wind resistant, but in the temperatures that we were going to come across, they weren't that good. At about 3 o'clock that afternoon, one of the sentries that was on high ground pointed across to down the wadi. There was a vehicle coming towards us, a small jeep type vehicle. And all of a sudden it just drove straight towards us, and we didn't know what the hell it was. We obviously knew it was Iraqi. So, you know, you can only take it that it's obviously enemy. Because of the immediate shock that, Jesus, there's a vehicle coming towards us, it did cause a bit of an initial flap once we identified who they were.
Some fuck is coming! Come on.
He drove right up towards our vehicle and stopped within about 30 metres of it. The driver got out, the commander got out, and 2 guys stayed in the back. And we was all under the cam net, getting ready to let these guys have it. And as he came towards us, I thought, Jesus, I'm going to kill this bloke. And, you know, the first kill. And as he came towards us, one of our guys walked out with his weapon behind his back. Our lad lifted his weapon up. At that point, he had a stoppage, but at the exact same point, I dropped the guy. This all happened in an instant, but it seemed to take a great deal of time.
Keep him down! Bastard's been hit! Smack him now! Smack him!
At the same time, and I'm talking literally over seconds, I got up with another guy and started moving towards the vehicle. As we got there, one lad was pulling the body out of the back, and there was a big jet of blood just spurted out, which stuck in my mind, you know, because that's the graphic detail of it.
Smack him up! Get him over to the vehicle, quick as you can! Move it! Get him back down! Get him down!
That's what's dead. He's had it.
Okay, get back and check the vehicle. Check the guys, get ready now.
The guy died very, very quick. The other Iraqi was massively traumatised. He was in great shock because all of a sudden he was on a normal reconnaissance for the area, and next thing he knows, everybody that's within us had been killed.
Okay,
Where's the money? Where's the money? Where?
They were the reconnaissance group, the command group for a very large artillery division. And the information that they had on them gave the Allies a massive amount of information of what was going on in Iraq, basically. We was told afterwards, when we eventually got back across the border, there was somewhere in the region of 30,000 troops coming into our immediate area where we was. And at that point, we was actually surrounded by them already. The immediate shock of everything died down very, very quickly. We realised we'd got 3 bodies, we'd got a prisoner of war, we'd got a vehicle, deniable operation. What the hell do we do with it? Initially we was going to bury the bodies there and then, but it would have been ludicrous because their forces would have come to that location anyway and seen them, because we could only dig very shallow graves. So we got the prisoner, threw him on the MSV, and the bodies, we threw them back in their own vehicle. And one of our lads volunteered to drive the vehicle, and he had an ulterior motive in doing so, because this was a covered vehicle. It had a roof, but it also had a heater, and the intention was that we would take the vehicle with us. We then bugged out, as we call it, and moved away from the location, but heading the opposite direction to what they came from. I think we were in the region of about 75 to maybe 100 miles behind enemy lines at this stage. Throughout that night was quite a nightmare, because we were surrounded by a massive force, and the intention was that an helicopter would come in that night, take the bodies, the vehicle, and the prisoner of war. At that stage, when we stopped and the guy got out of the vehicle that had been driving the bodies around all night, he smelt quite badly, because obviously these bodies were starting to decompose in the back of the vehicle, but he was totally unaware of that, because he'd been nice and warm all night in his little vehicle, which was slightly amusing, and it, you know, even though it was horrific what had happened, but it brought a few smiles on people's faces that he was nice and warm, but he stunk to high heaven. The helicopter came in when it was dark, and they would fly at ultra low level, literally 10 or 15 feet off the ground. The pilots were incredibly good at night, on night goggles. We got the vehicle ready with the bodies in the vehicle, ready to push on board the aircraft. The helicopter landed, massive amount of noise. Anyway, the RAF loadmaster decided that vehicle wasn't going anywhere near the helicopter. So we was immediately in a predicament. What the hell do we do with it? The prisoner went on the aircraft, a bit of commotion. and the aircraft took off. We're still stuck with an Iraqi vehicle with 3 dead bodies in it. What do? Our fears were definitely the fact that if we keep taking these around with us and we do get captured, they're going to look at it and say, well, these people, these European soldiers have got 3 of our men dead in a vehicle, and they would probably kill us. So we had to dispose of the bodies. There was a gully, and we just dug it out even more in the space of about half hour. And we literally just threw the vehicle into the pit, obviously with the bodies inside, and shoved 2 anti-tank mines that we had that we carried around with us, which are massive, big mines. Shoved them under the vehicle, poured the rest of the kerosene and the diesel fuel that we weren't using around the vehicle, shoved a big can of petrol inside the vehicle with the bodies, and put a timer on the devices, on the mines, set the timer to go off. I think it was around about 5 o'clock the following morning, or that morning I should say, and which would give us, 5 or 6 hours to get away, as far away from it as possible. And that's exactly what happened. So lo and behold, we drove all night to find another location, and literally at about 5 o'clock that morning, we didn't hear it, but we could see a flash on the horizon as this thing had gone up and hopefully incinerated and disposed of the evidence and the bodies that were there. And the flash died down as it was just starting to come daylight. That was that.
Victor 2, an Iraqi military installation responsible for communications and the guiding of mobile scuds. Heavily defended. A classic hit-and-run night raid that echoes the SAS days of World War II.
We used to get sit reps every night from headquarters telling us what was going on. An intelligence report came in that there's a big microwave installation to our north, which they wanted us to go and recce it with the intention of destroying it. Basically what we had was a building, a square building, with a massive antenna in it, with microwave dishes all around it. And it was surrounded by a number of different vehicles, buildings, porta cabins, and the such like. We was tasked basically to go into the installation with a big bag of explosives, which would be on a safety fuse, which would give us in the region of about a minute and a half to get back out. The theory was that we might be fighting our way in and out, because we didn't know how many troops would be in there. But that's how we was going to work it. Peace through superior firepower, that's how we was going to do it. Those 2 vehicles that was very close to the objective, 2 big vehicles, one of them with what looked like a water bowser or a fuel bowser. I was tasked to go and ID that one and just watch that. Everything was very, very quiet. You could literally hear a pin drop. never thought that we would fail in his mission. As for thinking about not coming back, yeah, it entered my mind every night, and it normally entered my mind just before we started off. And at that point, I would always think, well, is this going to be the night? You know, and I'd say little things to myself and occasionally offer myself a little prayer that everything would be all right for not just myself, but for all the boys.
Shut the fuck up!
We'd initiated the contact and the whole place erupted. Installation. We've got a minute and a half before the explosives went off. We started taking quite a bit of incoming. There was a massive amount of fire coming from our right. Tracer rounds were then starting to come very close, and it's a very weird feeling when you've got these, what I call red hornets, flying at you, and they're hitting the ground all around you and bursting all over the place. Some unknown reason, not one bloke was actually touched. We just were very, very lucky. The advantage that we had is that we had the bottle to go and do it. And the old, you know, the cliche is, and it's very, it may sound very silly, who dares wins, but at the end of the day, we did have that going for us. We knew what we were doing. They didn't know who the hell we were, and we went in there and achieved his mission, and we didn't lose anybody in doing so. When we got back across the border a few weeks later, a few of us approached the intelligence guys, basically to start doing some finger poking and find out what had actually gone on. They informed us that there were in excess of between 250 to 300 enemy troops on that one location. And we realised then that we'd been up against a far bigger force, but in no way superior.
Every mobile column that set off to carry out a mission achieved their aim 100% successfully. The Iraqis were forced to move their Scuds out of range of Israel. Those that remained were destroyed on the ground.
General Schwarzkopf decided he'd pay us a visit, and he came and visited our squadron. His personal jet came in, and he came up and he shook hands with every man in the squadron, and he gave us a speech, and the speech was by far one of the most exhilarating speeches I've ever heard in my life. To hear this man sing our praises, and this is when we realised the impact that we'd had actually over there. The major impact arose when he started mentioning about the Israelis himself saying that they'd gone to speak to the Israelis about not entering the war because of the threat of losing the Allies. And he emphasised the point that it wasn't until he mentioned that he had special forces behind enemy lines that the Israelis then started to back down. But it wasn't until the Israelis asked which special forces were there. And he said, we've got British SAS behind enemy lines, that they then did actually back down. And when he said this, I found it the most exhilarating thing I'd ever heard in my life, that for some unknown reason that SAS soldiers had probably stopped the Israelis coming into the war. And no other reason than that.
The guy who owned this AK-47 was trying to kill me with it. Now I own it, and he's dead. From 1970 to 1976, the British fought a secret war in Oman, a war that no one's ever heard of. In that war, many people died. Some were heroes. This film is about 4 of them. Oman. You're looking into a medieval world, a world that still chopped people's hands off for thieving. Women were stoned to death for adultery. The man, he was the head of the household. The woman was a mere chattel. It was a warrior race. You were looking at a society without hospitals, without medical aid, without roads. Currency was in camels. A society that was ripe for communist takeover. In the early days, our main task was to support the Sultan's armed forces. Since the communist takeover of Aden in 1967, the communist regime, backed of course by Moscow, was supporting the rebels in Dhofar with a direct arms supply line. If it had been allowed to carry on, they would have worked their way right up to the top of Muscat, and they would have probably captured the Musandam Peninsula, which looks straight across at the Straits of Hormuz, which is one of the most tactical sea lanes in the world. They could have cut the world in half. It could have all led eventually to the Third World War if we hadn't controlled the region. There were 9 of us. We were all seasoned soldiers, veterans. Most had served in Borneo, Aden. They were good, well-trained soldiers who were steady under fire. Fuzz. He liked a few drinks, did Fuzz. A man who wore Afghan jackets and beads. Fuzz always used to carry around with him a battery-operated tape recorder, and his favourite tape was The Easy Rider. Became a sort of an anthem. A very good mortar man. He would end up carrying the day in many respects. Labber, a man of immense physical courage, determination and humour, A man who never knew fear. A man who could carry enormous weights on his back all day long and still go out on the piss at night. A warrior. This man would save my life. Tak, his brother in arms, another Fijian, who would carry on the fight even though seriously wounded. His back shot away, propped up. He would fire an SLR, which has got a particularly aggressive kick. He would carry on firing that rifle, even though he must have been in extreme physical pain. He wouldn't surrender. Tommy, first-class medic, one of the boys, good to be with, a free-faller, handsome guy. He didn't even get a medal for running up under fire, and they never recognised him. Mike Keeley, his father won the DSO in the Second World War. Young troop officer, brave, courageous, did his job on the occasion. The intelligence briefing we got was of a bunch of insurgents who would fight to the death. They knew all the latest guerrilla tactics. They had the full range of Soviet weapons, and they had the supply route back up from Aden, a communist port. Remember, you must win the hearts and the minds of a population to win that sort of a battle scenario. Mirbat itself was a seaside town. It always reminded me of a small Cornish fishing town, but not quite as organised. The place would stink of fish. There was rats in all the houses. The back streets were littered with rubbish. They didn't seem to have any organisation as far as modern society is concerned. No collection of refuse. A backward nation in every sense. When we arrived there with modern medicines, it was like we were the messiahs. We could make people walk again just by injecting them with a few cc's of butazolidine. And the actual BAT medical centre became like a focal point for the whole town. We were given a house by the wali of Mirbat. It had a good flat roof where we could form a defensive position. We mounted a GPMG in the sustained fire role on one corner of the building. We had a 5.0 Browning mounted on the other corner of the building. From this position we had a good view of the Mirbat plain, also a good view of the fort, the DG fort, which was a Dhofar gendarmerie position. And we set up in the Bat House, not knowing that it would lead to one of the decisive battles against communism that's been fought since Korea.
We've just about completed our 5 months tour, and we were handing over to another squad who's arrived the day before. And we were just going through with them the type of job we were doing. The morale is always very, very high, especially when you're looking forward to going home. We've done 5 months, and it's been quite a hard 5 months. We were involved with the same squad at the time, up in the hills. We had so many battles, working together, working 2 squads at a time. People have seen actions, almost every day in the mountain. But as far as we were concerned, we were all looking forward to going home. And this was our last night, and we were due to go back to Salalah, and from there we go back to UK. And everybody was all relaxed, and nobody ever expected anything like that to happen, especially when it's your last day.
The night before the battle, we had a visit from the G Squadron rep. G Squadron were about to take over. We, B Squadron, had come to the end of our 3-month tour. Some of the guys had gone to bed early, myself included. Labber, who liked a drop of run and fuzz, decided to get stuck into G Squadron's issue of rum. We'd used ours up. You could hear the low hum of stories from Borneo, because Labber and Fuzz had both been in Borneo before. So I must have drifted off to sleep. My first recollections of the battle beginning must have been in the small hours. I could hear this thudding and a rumbling noise. Unbeknown to us, the night picket on Jebel Ali had already been taken out and put to the knife. The first thing I saw was about 40 to 50 Adu. They suddenly began moving across our front, advancing at speed. It was obvious that the 40 and the 25-pounder was their objective. If they'd taken that and turned it on us, it would have all been over. It was at this point that one of the old guys from the Askaris in the Wallis fort must have decided enough is enough. How he pulled the trigger and opened fire. The steel shutters crash to the ground. Humanity and compassion are locked outside. You don't think of the enemy as human beings. They are a running, shouting, aggressive, lunging threat. Prior to the open fire, Labber had already run up to the BG fort and was firing the 25-pounder. We could see the flash, we could see the movement, we could see all the activity around the base of the fort. We had radio contact with him on the Tokai, and he was firing on registered targets. Very difficult when you think that's a 3-man gun crew, and he was firing on it on his own. Got a message, a garble message a bit later to say that he'd been chinned. At this point, that Takman made a personal decision that he would go and join his Fijian brother, and he just disappeared into the gloom.
Robert called us saying that he's been chinned. What he meant was he had a graze on his chin, either ricocheted or a bullet. About between 300 and 400 yards up on a hill. I ran up, dodging as much as I can, taking cover when I had to. Advancing towards the fort, you know, the firing is getting heavier from all directions.
Keely then tried to get in contact with Tak, who had taken the Tokai with him, so that he could have an up-to-date situation report of what was going on around the gun pit. He couldn't get through to the Tokai in the gun position, so he then had to make a personal decision to go and find out what was going on up there. Set, still keying out for reinforcements. I finished the message and Mike Keeley just turned and said, fire us in, which meant I had to get up on the 5-0 Brown and cover him in. So the die was cast. I put down the headphone on the 316 and raced up to the 5-0 Brown and waited. I remember looking down and I could just see the pair of them slipping off to the right where there was a small wadi that ran up towards the DG fort, and off they went, potting forward, one man covering, one man firing. And then that was the last I saw them. See the 25-pounder still firing, belching flame. There was smoke swirling everywhere. There was heavy machine gun fire hitting it. There was mortar rounds landing. The whole area was just a frenzy of activity.
Lab and I knew at the time that we were almost surrounded. So Lab crawled away from the gun pit towards the mortar. I looked at Lab, he looked at me, and it's as if he knew something was going to happen. And I had this crack. And I turned, and all I could see was a blood. A bullet hit his neck. And the blood was pouring out, and Labo died instantly within seconds. Toby was the first one to come in over the Sana, and as he was climbing over the Sana, he got shot on the jaw. And all I could see was his face being totally torn apart.
Magazine!
The best sound that I ever heard was the screaming of jets, Strike Master, that came from the sea, burst us once and did a circle and came in with heavy armaments, firing machine guns and more or less right on top of us. And I believe the only thing that saved us at the time was the jets.
The battle, in fact, was drawing to a close. We'd had quite a few successful airstrikes, and the Adu were in retreat. I didn't know at this stage of the game what the casualties were. We had lost comms earlier in the battle. Somebody had ordered up a Kazivac chopper, and that flew past the bat house and landed up by the DG fort. I could see them loading bodies in. It then took off again, flew towards the bat house and landed near the front door. I could clearly see from where I was up in the 5-0 Browning, the command post, I could clearly see the pilot with his arm waving, beckoning, so I thought I'd better go down and see what's going on. I ran down the stairs, out through the front door, and there he was still beckoning. I ran over to where the pilot was seated, and he shouted over the noise of the rotor blades, "Can you check the bodies in the back? We believe one of them's yours." I peeled back the blanket on the first body, and there was a dead Arab, gunshot wounds to the head in the middle, and the dead Arab. And then I got to the top body, peeled back the blanket. It was the figure of a male laying face down, head laying on the crook of the arm, the features obscured. I attempted to turn the body over, but rigor mortis had set in. It was solid. I then had to lever the whole body up using the crook of the elbow. As I levered the body upwards, I could just see Labour's features. The jawline had been shot away, but I could tell it was Labour by his eyes. They were still open. It was like a sledgehammer blow to the morale. I was still hyped up after the battle, but all feelings of exhilaration disappeared in a flash. Here was a man I'd drunk with, fought with, laughed with, and here he was, laid out on a stretcher, stiff as a board. It was just too much. I was engulfed with sorrow at the loss of such a comrade. So no. If he hadn't carried on the fight, that position would probably have been overrun. And who knows what would have happened then. He was given an MID because they claimed the war was secret, and if they'd have given him a VC, the publicity, he would have been front page news back in UK, and then everybody would have descended on Dhofar just like they did in Vietnam with the Yanks, and we would have suffered accordingly. So they gave him an MID. You can get an MID for walking down the Falls Road in Northern Ireland. We were told when we got back that every man would get at least an MM. That never materialised. We were then told that Takavisi would get the DCM, and that's fair enough. And then we were told that Mike Keeley got the DSO, just as his father had done in the Second World War. And then we heard that Tommy, who'd run up under fire to give medical aid and got shot in the process, would get nothing, not even an MID. I mean, that in itself is worth a VC. He got nothing. The rest, we just have our memories. I finally made the decision to go back in 1995, and it was quite a shock as we made our way into the town itself. It all sort of, 23 years just disappeared, It was, it's as though I'd never been away. And then I started to get this feeling of elation again as we got into the town. I thought, yeah, we did a good job that day. Look at it, look at the progress. Look, they've big housing estate now across the battlefield. This place has been redeveloped. We actually did a good job that day. Probably saved all the villagers from a untimely death, and ourselves, of course. and there is real progress here. So I guess the guys didn't give their lives away for nothing. I think at the end of the day it was a job well done.